So in April of 2023, I had been doing game dev for about 3 years, and despite all of the courses, the education, and all of the sweat and effort that I had put into my projects, I had nothing to show for it. Instead, all of my games lay incomplete, where they are destined to live in game dev death void. And things were looking pretty dire for me back then. Game development seemed like a pipe dream that was made for better people. Words like, I'll never be good enough. How foolish was I to think that I could create something meaningful entered my mind again and again. At Iceberg Studios, well, it was slowly dying out. Yet, these statements are detrimental to your own productivity and our own feelings of self-worth. Despite how many people tell you, no, you are smart, or hey, this is actually pretty cool, we have a hard time believing them. However, 3 things shifted my view and allowed me to finally finish my very first and own indie game. These tools in hand, no matter if you are new to game development or even if you've been around for a while like I had been, you'll see rise in productivity and start to feel better about game development itself. Without further ado, let's get started. So the very first thing I want to talk about is simply, what is your project? You see, when I first started learning game development, it was super easy to follow tutorials and create these little prototypes before moving on to the next big project. In a way, I think this kind of led me to a false sense of security. Oh, game development isn't really that bad. Oh boy, but I did not know there's a pretty big difference between following instructions and doing something yourself. I mean, I would like to think that I had good intentions at first, because once I had finished an entire course on Unity game development, I promised myself that I would start by creating this very small and simple choose your own adventure game in Unity. It was just going to be static images in the background with text that would kind of give you the story of what's going on, and then you would just simply choose between different options that would appear at the bottom. Yet, that time, even that proved too difficult. I would end up abandoning that idea. Now, you would think that I would move on to something even easier than that. Well, instead of a nice and simple game, I thought about creating this 3D game in Unreal, where I would just do the game and level design as well as do some product management for a small team. Without any money though, I had to promise rev share to the other 5 individuals. And as you can imagine, between us going nowhere fast, my lack of personal experience on all ends of game development, and the scope of the project just being, well, way too big, as the idea was to make something similar to Chrono Trigger, but have party members act similar as they did in Dragon Age. Yeah, those were some really dark times, because my ambitions were just way too high. But it does bring me to the idea of project scope. I personally needed to face the truth, and maybe you do too. No matter what way you try to slice the work or make it easier, it just needs doing. There are no shortcuts in game dev. Yes, you can make it easier, but even when using help or even just using assets, you'll have to figure out how the assets work, how to add them or make changes if that's necessary, and how to put them in the style that you're looking for. I mean, even AI can't do all of the work for us. I do tend to use AI sometimes when it comes to writing a script or looking over code. That's just about it. It's kind of a buddy. It's not a, hey, do this thing for me. So, as game developers, we really need to stop and talk about scope. I mean, you'll hear it online. People will tell you, don't start a project that's too big. I don't feel like anyone ever talks about what that looks like or what that even feels like for an individual. And honestly, until you've finished a game without following a tutorial, you really aren't going to know how well you personally adapt. So you really need to start small. You feel stuck a lot of the time. So if you're spending weeks or constantly having to ask other people for help, then your project might be too big for what you can actually handle right now. And there's nothing wrong with asking people for help, but there comes a time when we have to face the facts that maybe we just don't have the skill to pull this off. But the great thing about game development is you can always come back to it. That dream MMORPG or the dream roguelike doesn't have to be your first game. You can always come back to it. The reason is because it feels better once you start being able to move along with your own project rather than getting stuck every step of the way and constantly feeling like you're in the mud. The next main thing is that you need evidence. Now, as I've mentioned, you've all heard just finish a small project. And if you're like me and you hear that advice and you think, well, small projects don't really excite me. I want to do something big, something that, inspires me, that when I play, I'm like, yes, this is what I want to create, something like this. Or you think it might be too much of a distraction, like, oh, I don't have time to do that because, I'm already working on this project. And if I start a smaller project, then I'm never going to get this one done. But listen, there are a lot of boons to consider that comes from finishing a small project. And one of those boons is perhaps the most important thing that you're going to come across in your game dev journey. If you are newer to game development, you will get an idea of what it feels like to actually finish a game and what project scope actually looks like. From there, you have a firm footing on what may be too big for you to handle on your own unique journey. Think of it like this. Imagine you need to cook something for a party. Now, imagine that you don't look up what kind of ingredients that dish takes. Instead, you just go to the grocery store, you pick out a few items that you know for certain are in the dish, and then you come home and you prepare to make it. Well, not only do you spend more time shopping, because then you're second guessing yourself the whole entire way, like, oh, well, maybe this would fit in well, or maybe this could work. And at the end of it, you just have a mediocre dish. Reason is that you just don't know what you don't know. What Alex Hormozy calls ignorance debt. Another thing he explains really well is stacking undeniable proof. And this is where the evidence comes in. The reason I feel like I can make these YouTube videos and talk about certain things is because either I've already done it or it's something I'm currently going through. Thus, if you find yourself stuck and you don't know what to do, think about what is the most immediate and simple step that you can take. Little mini goals like this will give you motivation and courage to keep going. Then when people ask you for proof, you can show them what you've done. And when you have to talk about it, you can, because you've done the things that you're talking about. Plus, it just feels really good. Yeah, you might only get a few comments. I mean, I have only gotten one on the actual project page itself, and a few more here and there throughout. And yeah, some of them are probably going to be some negative feedback, or some constructive feedback, as how I like to look at it. None of that really matters. What matters is that you did it. You submitted your project and people you know have told you, I've played it. I can tell you, when you put it in that perspective, it makes you feel like you're on top of the world. Like you've just achieved some great milestone. That feeling is great. And of course, as long as you remember to come back down. Thus, make a small game and release it. If you struggle to find a game that is basic, take just one element from a bigger game and make that mechanic the entire game. That's what I did with Annie's Cross. I wanted to tell a story, and I like stories. So I thought, let's just do a tiny little story game. Ended up having a few puzzles, yes, and it ended up having an enemy. That just all worked with the context of what I was making. A game about content creation and the struggles and ideas that come along with it. By the way, do you enjoy these kind of talks? Or do you want a place where you can maybe hang out with myself or some other developers? If so, consider joining my Discord. Link in the description. And consider supporting this channel by subscribing and giving the video a big thumbs up. Thank you. It means a lot to me. And let's get back to the final point in about bonus tie-in that I have for you. And that point being that your environment matters. Now, I'm not going to tell you to make your bed or keep a tidy workspace, as that information has been repeated a lot. What I am going to talk to you about is not your physical environment, the one here in your brain. I think Einstein said it best when he said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Now, what does that mean in terms of your mental space? Well, first, are you stressed or feeling overwhelmed by things that are not related to game development? Having worries outside of game development is only going to make things worse because there's going to be some pressure from game development itself. And if you already maxed out on pressure and the anxiety, well, there's a good chance that you're going to burn out. When I was at work, I often felt tired. It wasn't necessarily because the job was overly exhausting, mostly just standing retail, but it was just I had no time to do the things that I loved. So I did my best to cut back on expenses, and I quit one of the part-time jobs. Alexander here once said, "You often feel tired not because you've done too much, but because you've done too little." What sparks the light in you. And I think this is true. You have to do the things that you love. Because we only have one shot at life. So do what you can to give that shot its best chance. Furthermore, your online environment makes a difference. Are you surrounded by a lot of negativity, drama, or non-productive stuff? I'm not saying don't have fun. There is a time and place for it. There's also a time to work. Thus, maybe you need to find YouTube channels, for example, that help motivate or inspire you to be the best that you can be. For me, I personally remember back in around April, Thomas Brush was hosting a live workshop on starting a game studio in 12 months. In that video, he mentioned releasing a game on itch.io, no matter what kind of state it was in. That way, you have something out there. And I remember when I heard that, there was a fire burning within inside of me. I wasn't angry at Thomas, no. I had looked back 3 years. 3 whole years. And for what? Nothing. It wasn't because I wasn't skilled enough to be a game developer, and there was no excuses that I could give myself. I had to honestly sit down and be like, it's your own fault you're in this situation. Think about it. You've put in the work, but anytime something didn't work out, anytime you got scared, you just delete it. And then you wouldn't have that evidence to show anyone. At the time, it was easy to live in ignorance. But finally, I had to ask myself, this has to stop. And thus, on that day, a different version of Annie's Cross was born. I had set off with the goal to complete it in just 1 month. But around that same time, something else amazing happened. I came to YouTube. People resonated with my story. Thus, my environment changed. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had an accountability partner. A whole bunch of you, in fact. Now, I felt like if I failed, I'd be letting down all of you. Therefore, it was time to finish Annie's Cross. I almost didn't finish Annie's Cross. That was until about 3 days before the YouTube video was due, and I realized this was the final devlog, which meant that the game needed to be done. So, how does it actually help you in terms of motivation and self-talk? Well, all of these things simply come back to your frame of mind. For example, I know I'm not a pretty person in terms of looks. I've had therapists tell me, just got to accept that you're pretty. Or I've had people tell me, like, no, you're pretty, and it's okay. I don't need to lie to myself or look into the mirror each day and tell myself, you are pretty, be pretty, think you're pretty. That energy is just so exhausting and can honestly be spent better elsewhere. Because the reality of the situation is, just because I don't have a pretty face doesn't mean I can't have a pretty heart. It also doesn't mean that I can't contribute to society in some way. So my thing is, stop focusing on the things that you can't control. Start focusing on the things that truly matter to you. So the same goes for your games. Stick to what you can control in the moment. It also doesn't mean that you can't eventually make that dream game. You just have to build a system that allows you to build the next machine. and feel good in the process of doing it. It is a journey that you should be proud of each achievement that you make along the way, because only you can make that journey. So what are you waiting for? Stop watching this video. Go change your life. But until next time, it's going to be it for me. Remember, keep creating, spark the imagination. Take care, friends, and I'll see you next time. I think that's the road. See you next time.